100 years ago, a meteorite fell on the continent. After colliding with the ground, it shattered into many pieces. From it emerged countless eggs, scattered all over the earth. And from the eggs emerged terrible monsters. Hordes of insects declared war on humanity. But firearms were of no help. However, many years later, a person was found in the world who was capable of concluding a spiritual contract. He was able to help women awaken their spiritual form, and men could enter into contracts with them. And it was this force that changed the course of events, saving the last part of humanity. The action moves to the Qingteng Academy, 100 years after the disaster. The girl touched the purple crystal and something began to happen in her body. She turned into a sword, and the examiner declared that Gu Lin was a C-rank sword with the characteristic of sharpness. This upset her greatly. Meanwhile, the main character mingled with the crowd. Xiao Mei was called in for an inspection. She walked up to the crystal and placed her hand on it. A beam of light struck from the sky, and everything around was illuminated by a bright light. The girl began to transform, and a moment later she became a spear. The teacher said that Xiao Mei had obtained a contract with an S-rank spirit, and her weapon was a bloody silver spear with 2 features. Whispers started spreading everywhere, as something like this hadn't happened for a long time. Everyone thought that she might team up with an S-rank guy, but she already had a boyfriend. However, she then approached the main character and said that they should separate. Thus, the problem with the guy was solved. The crowd started laughing at him. It was a big blow to his ego. After all, he always listened to her before. He humiliated himself before her just so that she would stay. However, he decided that he would not allow this to happen again. The guys around him started to continue to bully him, because he was not worthy of an S-rank weapon. And the hero didn't understand why they thought he couldn't reach that rank. The girl didn't believe in him either, and openly mocked him. And now it was Han Zhan's turn. He walked up to the crystal and placed his hand on it. However, at first nothing happened. His ex-girlfriend had already started laughing at his weakness. But suddenly the square was illuminated by the brightest light. It was so strong that the students' eyes narrowed. They couldn't believe their eyes. And the heavenly beam continued to expand. The protagonist has received SSS rank Divine Awakening. Xiao Mei's expression suddenly changed, something that only happens once in 100 years. The last time such a master turned the tide of war and helped humanity survive. Suddenly the main character was surrounded by women. They offered everything imaginable, but the guy wasn't interested. A moment later, Han Zhan opened the system window. It had 3 features, one of which removed the limit on the number of contracts. Xiao Mei immediately jumped up to him to apologize, but the hero did not react to this in any way. The girl said that in exchange for resuming their relationship, she would let him hold her hand. Meanwhile, Han Zhan was looking at all of her characteristics. This was the first feature of his spirit. After thinking for exactly a second, he refused her offers. After all, with his ability, he will be able to find suitable partners for himself. The other girls began to openly laugh at her, because Xiao Mei had just dumped her boyfriend a minute ago. And then they started laughing at Xia, who had even awakened an E-rank spirit. This was the lowest rank. Xia Yue was incredibly beautiful, but fate treated her cruelly. She cried and didn't understand why everyone was making fun of her. And unable to bear her feelings, she rushed away. But suddenly I accidentally stumbled upon the main character. She recoiled and fell backwards, and the black-haired one managed to catch her. He saw in the details of her spirit that she had a contract with Fu Xichin, and he couldn't understand why, despite possessing one of the 10 divine artifacts, she only had an E rank. She immediately began to apologize to him, but the guy was not going to be angry with her. He put his hand on her head and said that he wanted to make a contract with her. The girl couldn't believe her ears. The other women couldn't believe it either and instantly became angry. Suddenly the director of the academy, Chen Guangpu, came out to them. He said that contracts should not be entered into recklessly, and the hope that had appeared in the girl's heart immediately began to melt away. She understood her helplessness and agreed with the director. Suddenly someone interrupted their conversation. It was the fear of the dark blue city of Zhaohu, whose face was distorted with anger. He was Xiao Mei's godfather, and he already wanted to deal with the arrogant bastard. The man said that if he said a word, no one would dare to make a contract with Zhang. Xiao Mei wanted to be given a contract, but the hero said she was not worthy of it. The godfather did not tolerate this, and immediately entered into a fight, but his hand was intercepted. The hero didn't even bat an eye. The school principal stopped the vice captain. The man didn't stop, saying that if the guy signed a contract with Xia Yue, then everything would be over. The guy said that nothing would change his decision. He picked up Xia Yue and invited her to sign the contract. She was ashamed that she was the cause of nothing but trouble, but the hero stopped her, saying that she was more than worthy of it, and a spell immediately began to swirl around them. Ajan activated Divine Insight. The girl was in ecstasy. A purple haze enveloped her body, and a moment later, an SSS rank weapon appeared in the hero's hands. She had 3 distinct features, and the guy was surprised at how strong their connection was. The weapons began to dissolve, and the girl began to take on her human form. She didn't understand why she was now an SSS rank. In a burst of emotion, she thanked the hero. Meanwhile, people began to disperse. Meanwhile, Xiaomei asked her godfather for revenge, but he said that the hero had merged with an E-rank spirit, and now no one would even talk to him. Besides, there will soon be an assessment test in his dark blue city too. The girl thanked him, but he said that a simple thank you was not enough. Xiaomei immediately clung to him and said that she would repay him at home. And while they were talking, something inhuman flashed in the man's eyes. A couple of hours later, everyone was already discussing the recent news. Meanwhile, the godfather was busy with his own affairs and read this news with a smile. And Xiaomei was ecstatic and said that her daddy was the best. The man in turn looked lustfully at her butt, but all his thoughts were occupied with the fact that he wanted to take revenge on the hero. Meanwhile, a new day had begun at school. People looked at Jen and Mei as if they were crazy, and the girl continued to apologize to him. However, he said that she shouldn't apologize, because she was the beauty of the academy. Throwing her a bun, he said that she should eat better, because the ceremony was coming soon. In general, she should forget these clowns, because soon they will see what the girl is capable of. Suddenly someone called out to Khan. Wang Lumao approached him and began to mock him. He was Xiaomei's new spiritual contractor. Suddenly the hero and his girlfriend burst out laughing, because Lumao also meant a green hat. Van's face immediately twisted with anger. However, Xiaomei urged her betrothed to ignore the guy. They didn't waste any time and went to the evaluation ceremony. A little later, the event finally began. A man wearing glasses stood in the center and loudly announced that the ceremony was beginning. The testing will be in several stages, and the first to be called were Xiaomei and Wang Lumao. Having risen from the stands, they went to the center, and then huge gates began to open. And a moment later, a monster began to crawl out of them. It was a dark beetle, and the couple immediately began to prepare for battle. The beetle jumped at them, but the guy already had a spear in his hands. He repelled the monster's first attack, and then he counterattacked from the side. However, the weapon was unable to penetrate the thick armor. Then the guy decided to try again. His movements marked the field, and he flew with force straight into the creature's carcass. This blow was able to pierce through the monster. All the students were delighted, because this was a battle of an S-rank master. Meanwhile, someone was watching the battle from cameras. It was the teaching staff. Wei Qing, the head of the first district, in turn said that that guy was still far from the level of the workers. However, his teacher hit him on the head. Li Jingxuan, who was in charge of the second round, said that their strike was 20% weaker than it should have been, and she probably lacks self-discipline. Her godfather did not show his emotions. The examiner congratulated them on their victory, as they had broken the academy's previous historical record. Everyone was curious to see how Han Zhan would perform, and the examiner just started calling the next pair to the center. This couple turned out to be the main character and his companion. They stood in front of the gate and began to wait. But suddenly something caught the black-haired man's attention. The difficulty level was first, but for some reason they were attacked by 10 dark moths at once. The hero could not understand why everything turned out this way. The students also looked puzzled. The examiner explained that the difficulty for those with an SSS rank increases tenfold. But in reality, it was just a deception, because he had previously spoken with Xiaomei's godfather. Meanwhile, the monsters were getting closer, but the guy was ready. His fingers immediately grabbed the girl, who turned into a weapon, and a pleasant melody rolled through the hall, which became the last one for the monsters. After all, they were cut into pieces in an instant, and the disciples could not believe their eyes. The teachers, meanwhile, were extremely shocked. Absolutely everyone was delighted, and even the bespectacled man was surprised by such strength, although their test turned out to be much more difficult. The man behind him explained that it was the decision of the Dark Blue City's leader, as an SSS-ranked hero must lead by example. But in his mind, he couldn't understand how he managed to cope. The head of the first district said that everything was fine since they had the same problem. They all wanted to know this guy's limits. Meanwhile, the second level of the test began, and 20 black beetles began to crawl into the center of the hall. Meanwhile, Zhen's fingers played smoothly on the strings. Energy began to gather around him, which immediately headed towards the enemies. She scattered the beetles literally like small insects, and a second later they all fell to the floor. Zhen, however, found it a rather boring test. The students immediately became angry with him because he was acting too arrogantly. The head of the first district wanted to take the boy for himself, but the head of the third district, Ye disagreed. Suddenly a quarrel began to break out between them. However, The head of the 4th district, Shenzhou, who was responsible for studying the relics, suddenly interrupted them. However, they didn't let him in, because the two madmen were extremely aggressive. But their teacher immediately stopped the quarrel. Jingxuan, meanwhile, said that testing on beetles was pointless, so they decided to turn up the heat to the max. The head of the dark blue city, meanwhile, sat behind and quietly grew angry. However, he hoped that the boy would not withstand the most difficult test. Meanwhile, the hero stood and waited for the next test. The examiner announced that the difficulty would now be increased to the highest. The guy was now facing 10 giant second-level armored lizards, and also 10 second-level thunderbirds. The students unanimously thought that this was too much. Jen admitted that the opponents now look formidable, but Xiaoren and her betrothed continued to mock the guy. After all, even a master wouldn't be able to cope with such a crowd. The thunderbirds launched the attack first. Dense lightning bolts spread around from their chirping, and the guy immediately hit back, and the monsters were attacked by the warriors he created. They were dressed in heavy armor and their eyes were filled with blood. The first warrior finally reached the lizard. The crocodiles defended themselves, and the birds inflicted damage. And a moment later, the first of the warriors was scattered into several pieces. The lightning was like curved blades that cut through everything in its path. And the hero had to dodge. He played his breakthrough song and rushed forward. He was enveloped in yellow flames and was able to dodge the attacks. The other students couldn't understand how this was possible. Second-tier monsters usually kill newbies like bugs, but the guy continued to hold his own with dignity. He immediately played another serenade, and golden lines began to flow from the lute. Weiqing observed this, and said that at one time he only tested the grading system up to the 9th difficulty, but apparently they are now looking at a new record for the last 100 years. The head of the 2nd district also wanted this guy for himself, and now he has entered into a dispute with the other heads. The examiner tried to stop the hero, because he would hardly be able to fight. But he said that he needed a little time to come to his senses. He was going to play a song of restoration, and a second later, green light spread throughout the hall. The students' mouths were still open, because Jen had managed to surprise them more than a dozen times already. Meanwhile, feuds were brewing between the teachers. But suddenly someone tried to stop them. The head of the 5th district, Liu Jingchun, thought it was foolish to send such a fighter to the front lines. He said that if Jen went with him, the mortality rate of the contracted spirits would decrease by 30%. But these two madmen didn't even listen to him. And their teacher was already tired of their quarrels. And with his anger, he immediately stopped these stubborn people. Each circle is, of course, useful, since the first is responsible for attack, the second for strategy, the third expands territories, and the fourth is engaged in research. Like the 5th, which saves lives, the 6th, which guards the passages, the 7th, which furrows the oceans, and the 8th remains behind the scenes. All these 8 districts are considered the pillars of Daxia. However, a new 9th district will soon have to be created, and a new SSS rank hero will clearly be responsible for this. A little later, a monster began to appear from the gate. It was a 3rd-level red flame beast. He screamed, and the examiner said that surviving more than 3 minutes was now considered a failure. The heat from the monster immediately filled the hall, but the guy stood there and didn't dodge. He was preparing to fight this beast, and as a master of spiritual contract, he was going to defeat her. A second later, the monster spat its flames at him. A line of fire crossed the field, and Khan dodged to the side. A huge explosion erupted at the impact site, and the hero decided to use righteous energy and the energy of the wind. Together with his weapon, he rose into the air, and the wind was so strong that it blew off the wig of one of the spectators, and lifted up the girl's skirts. However, the main force still rushed towards the enemy. A huge tornado rushed towards the monster. His body immediately began to fall backwards, and later it soared upwards. He lost control of his actions, and a second later it fell apart under the influence of the wind. The spectators couldn't believe their eyes. The protagonist has just managed to defeat a 3rd-rank monster, but the forced use of the zither had a negative effect. Suddenly his body began to fall somewhere. He found himself in a white space where someone was praising him. The guy asked the man who he was, and the bespectacled man said that his name was Li Jing and he had a couple of questions. The man was interested in what the boy was going to fight for. He also said that he was here to prevent the Zerg from devastating their world. Someone behind them started clapping. Teacher Li Shu-tong stood behind them and said that he wanted to take the hero as a disciple. Han recognized him as a representative of the Li family, the most powerful in Daxia. 100 years ago, 3 major Zerg emperors united to destroy Daxia. At the most critical moment, Li Shu-tong single-handedly killed all 3 emperors. That's why the hero was glad of such an offer. He thanked the old man for this opportunity. However, he was also glad, and since this was their first meeting, he decided to give the guy a gift. It was a ring made from the bones of one of the Zerg emperors. It contained a terrifying ferocity and an overwhelming aura. It might frighten the weaker Zerg, but attract the stronger ones. The Khan was extremely pleased with this gift, and said that he would always carry it with him. And the old man said that the guy was different from the cowards who were afraid of the ring. Later he said that the hero needed to rest, and they headed off to have a snack. Meanwhile, the street was quite busy, and sitting in the establishment, the old man said that he had brought the elders so that Khan could get to know them. Li Jing introduced himself again. All the other captains also introduced themselves to the guy, and he said that he was glad to welcome everyone. One of the captains said that some of the seniors were unable to attend, but remembering the 8th, he immediately showed up. He handed the guy a business card and told him to call if he had any problems. And a moment later, he disappeared. Khan found him an interesting personality. Li Jing threw the box to the hero and said that it was a gift from all of them. The black-haired man smiled and thanked him. Suddenly, some woman came running in and started yelling angrily at the hero's charge. She really turned out to be the girl's aunt. The woman was unhappy that the girl had slipped out of the house without asking. And when Xia Yue tried to justify herself, her aunt raised her hand to her. However, she was immediately intercepted. It was Han Zhan. The aunt wanted a reward for raising this girl like a thing to be given away. Xia Yue became very angry at this attitude. She demanded that the woman stop. However, she did not fall for the girl's aggression. After all, my aunt had connections in the 4th circle. The manager of the 4th circle looked at her in surprise. But the aunt didn't know who he was, and so she abruptly shut him up. And she even called their teacher an old fart. She thought that everything was in her hands, and therefore said that she should be paid a dowry for Xia Yue. Li Shutong did not tolerate this. He asked why his students stood quietly while this bitch called him a pig. And then they suddenly started calling somewhere. The head of the 1st circle just sat and drank tea. Auntie didn't even think that these guys could do anything to her. But suddenly her phone vibrated. These same connections called her themselves and started yelling into the phone. Li Shutong looked at her with an important expression. The man on the phone said that if the woman wants to die, she can continue in the same spirit. And then the woman dropped her phone. She fell to the floor from exhaustion. The establishment staff soon approached her and asked her to leave, and she started to get hysterical, saying that the contract masters were offending her. Li Shutong was irritated by this, and quickly waved his hand towards the woman, and it began to be covered with a golden glow. Meanwhile, the girl apologized to the old man, but he understood her perfectly, and therefore she was extremely grateful to him. The old man, in turn, offered her something to eat. He began to explain how to use the structure in front of them. The central grill was for food that could be eaten right away, and the other 4 were for stewing. Suddenly, Khan asked what kind of food he would consider, and the old man said that everyone has their own path. The guy thought about the words about his own path. Suddenly, surprise appeared on Li Shutong's face. He noticed that all the beef had disappeared from the grill. The culprit turned out to be Xia Yue, who stole meat for her master. The Khan covered the beef with his hands, and without showing it, asked why the spiritual companions had not joined their meal. Li Jing asked if they shared the same bed, and then explained that after that, contract masters could gain a special ability. The form of the contract with the spirit is divided into 2 types, the object form and the human form. And now their companions are in human form, fighting monsters. Hana was surprised by this, and the girl was embarrassed that they would have to share the same bed. Li Jing asked if it was true that his companion had E rank, but Han explained that after signing the contract, her rank became SSS, which surprised everyone. All this happened because he immediately realized that he could awaken her. The teacher advised not to tell anyone about this, and the students agreed with this. Meanwhile, the captains began to report to the teacher that they had recently had unprecedented successes on the border. He was clearly happy with this news, and they all drank to Daxia. Time passed, and their celebration of life continued, and now it was time to go our separate ways. The teacher brought the boy to his new home. The Khan had no idea that the old man had his own house in the dark blue city, and he explained that this was his wife's hometown. The guy suddenly asked what was wrong with her. The old man's shoulders suddenly slumped, and remembering what he had experienced, he said angrily that she had died in battle. The world only remembers him for killing 3 emperors, but they don't know her name. It was a very sad story. The old man said with a serious tone that the guy should take care of Yue, because she was not a tool, but his other half. The Khan asked to name the teacher's wife, because as long as at least one person remembers her, she will live forever. Her name was Ling Mei, but the story was completely different, because she killed 2 emperors with her own hands. Immersed in sadness, the old man briefly said that they could choose any room they wanted. Li Shutu decided to go outside. He sat down on the grass with a photograph of his beloved, and said that he couldn't remember the last time they looked at the moon together. Some time later, someone called out to him. It was Han and Yue who suggested looking at the moon together. The old man did not get angry at them, but said that they reminded him of him and Lin Mei. And after activating his power, he said that he wanted to teach them martial arts. And as an example of his skill, he decided to show one technique. With just one blow, he was able to tear the tree to pieces. The martial art was called the 8 Locks Fist, which corresponds to the 8 hidden points in the human body. Khan immediately repeated the technique after him. The old man was even taken aback by such talent. The hero managed to intuitively determine the location of all the points. In this case, Li Shutong decided to teach him in practice. The black-haired man flew back from a strong blow from the fist. The old man did this so as not to cultivate arrogance in his student, and with tears in his eyes, he decided to teach him a lesson. After some time, there was not a single living spot on Khan's face. Finally, the next day arrived. Khan walked with his companion to the academy, and his face still hurt. On the way, he met his envious people, who mocked him again. They said that they would get rid of him like trash, and the girl became interested in what they were talking about. Later, they went into the director's office. He said he had bad news for them. After all, according to the agreement with their superiors, from today, they will be sent to the front lines. It was a terrible decision, given their talents, but Khan didn't think so. Maybe this is the path he should take. Xiao Mei's henchmen started harassing the guy from behind again, but the hero suddenly turned to face him. Anger was visible on his face. However, his classmate was confident in his strength, because yesterday he shared a bed with Xiao Mei, and his strength doubled. And so they clashed in battle. Their fists collided, creating a powerful explosion. And the hero's opponent suddenly felt that the bone in his forearm had shattered into pieces. His arm twisted at an unnatural angle, but Khan didn't plan to end it there. And the next blow landed in the face. After this, the hero's opponent was unable to stand on his feet. Having finished with this, Hanjan decided to leave. Meanwhile, the director noticed the body of the arrogant guy and thought that he had simply lost consciousness. After some time, the hero reached the right place and said that he wanted to join the organization. The worker didn't understand what he was talking about, and then he remembered that the vice captain had deliberately ordered that the hero's task be made more difficult. After typing the information into the computer, he learned that Khan had been assigned to Team 0527, and that he would be in charge of it. Then he invited the black-haired man to go forward. Meanwhile, there was complete devastation there. The team office looked disgusting. At the threshold, they were met by a girl who was surprised by their presence. Khan introduced himself as the new leader of the team, and the man lying behind her raised an eyebrow in surprise. He was amused that such a young brat called himself a leader. He suggested that they go for a walk somewhere further away. Yue asked why he was talking like that, and the man suddenly started to stand up. He approached her and immediately started hitting on her, wanting to sign a contract with her. But the hero nipped this in the bud. The man flew to the side, and blood poured out of all his cracks. A little later, he was able to come to his senses. Huo Yunwei asked Yufeng to deal with the new leader. In response, he asked for money for alcohol, but the girl immediately avoided further conversation. Yufan said that their team was poor, but the guy said that it was only temporary. In response to this, the man decided to show everything on the laptop. He showed statistics that said they were last among the Guardian teams in terms of points, and in 2 months they can be sent to the lower circle. The conditions there are extremely bad, and so the man advised the guy to get out of there as quickly as possible. However, the hero was not going to give up so easily. The girl suggested that they leave, since Yufan could no longer be saved, but the guy had a different opinion. Besides, he is being tested, and therefore he must show himself from a good side. Instead of running away, he decides to stay here, and prevent Zhao Hu's plan from coming to fruition. Opening the door, they saw Huo Yunwei sitting quietly at the table. The guy asked if she would really wait for her death, and he addressed her as Bai Shuang. She was extremely surprised that he learned her real name, because her specialty was changing bodies. Khan saw potential in her, because the girl was the only one who wanted to save the team. She thought that they wanted to threaten her. The hero responded by offering to go on a mission and split the money in half, so that the girl would gain his trust. Bai Shuang immediately agreed. The hero suggested that she find tasks, and he would select them. Suddenly, she immediately showed him the results of her search on the tablet. There were 3 tasks of minimal difficulty and the same reward. However, Khan decided to take the most difficult part of what was there in general. He took on the mission to destroy the Zerg, and Bai Shuang didn't understand why the guy was so confident in himself. However, now the girl had no choice. But if they fail the task, they will lose 10% of their bonus points. The guy wanted to take full responsibility. While he was leaving, Bai Shuang said that she would kill him if they failed the task. Meanwhile, at some warehouse, a guy was reporting that someone had taken on a cleanup task. Their leader thought it was Team 0018. However, they decided to go themselves and see who it was. Meanwhile, Han's team had almost reached the location, and Bai Shuang reported that there were more than 8 second-tier Zerg there. After this, the hero exchanged glances with his companion, and they understood each other. Han immediately broke into a run and asked Bai Shuang to wait for him where he was. But she only managed to shout that one such Zerg should be killed by an entire team, and here is their nest. Suddenly she heard some kind of rumble ahead. She thought that Khan had fallen into a trap, and so I decided to come to his aid. When she came running, she saw an amazing picture. All the monsters were scattered across different parts of the room, and the girl could not believe her eyes. Khan said that the task was not that difficult, and they should collect all the valuable materials. He also added that the security guy was already dead, and Bai Shuang was still wondering who that guy was. An hour later, footsteps began to thunder along the same corridor. 3 men ran to the scene and they saw that all the Zerg had already been defeated. One of the guys realized that all the monsters were killed in 1 second. Their leader was extremely stunned by this news. Meanwhile, an employee of the organization stood next to Zhao Hu. He said that Team 0527 had already completed 2 tasks, and their score had risen to 350. The man was extremely unhappy about this. He was extremely determined to take revenge on Khan, and so he ordered his servant to tell the teams to complete all the tasks in the city. Meanwhile, Han was eating at the table with the teacher, and the teacher asked if the boy needed help with Zhao Hu. However, he refused and said that he was more concerned about problems within the organization itself. The old man explained that he had chosen Khan to be the fire that would burn away all the rotten roots. Suddenly, the boy said that he had completed learning the Li Shu Tong technique, and the teacher said that the next stage would be extremely difficult. After all, in order to move on to the next stage, Khan needs to find himself on the brink of life and death. This surprised the guy, and closer to the evening he was finally able to lie down and rest. Yue suddenly burst into his room and asked to sleep with him. He wondered why she had chosen his room, and she said that their teacher closed all the other rooms. Then Khan decided to sleep on the floor. But the girl felt ashamed and asked him to stay in bed, and after a while they were sleeping peacefully in the same bed. The next morning they decided to take up the task again, and they greeted him with honors, because Bai Shuang found out who John was. Now she apologized to him for the insults. She also couldn't understand why the big shots sent such a talent to the wilderness. Han promised to change their organization, but Yufeng said that the guy would break his claws on Zhao. Bai Shuang then noticed that there were no orders in the system, and the guy said that perhaps this situation only happens in the dark blue city. They should try changing their location to another city, for example, Kanghai. It turned out that it worked, and this means that they will have to travel to different cities. Their path will be littered with high-level Zerg. Sometime later, they were already driving through the wasteland. The monsters came at them, but broke their fangs on the car. Yue had never seen such monsters, and Han explained that they were first-rank ash flies. Suddenly, Yufan woke up, and then I saw something. It was a tornado that killed all the locusts. It looked like they had hit their first problem. Yufeng, meanwhile, continued drinking and was eager to attack. Suddenly, Bai Shuang called out to the leader. She said that there was a carriage nearby that was being chased by a whole swarm of flies, so she wondered if they would save them. The hero immediately ordered her to turn towards the crew, and Yufan was still enjoying the ride. But to his regret, the driver decided to abruptly change the angle, and the man's head immediately flew into the steel crossbar. However, this could not dampen his mood. Meanwhile, the crew was almost blown to pieces. There was a woman who looked like Yue in one of the cars, and her bodyguard was telling them that they shouldn't speed. They had to wait for reinforcements, and so the old man radioed orders for everyone to begin performing the sacrifice. The woman tried to stop them, but the operation had already begun, and most of the crew turned towards the enemy. They started firing with all the guns they had, and even rockets were launched into this tornado of insects. However, this did not stop him. The woman burst into tears over these losses, but the bodyguard tried to calm her down. Suddenly they heard some strange sound, and from outside they saw that several golden discs began to fly into the tornado. Meanwhile, Khan moved into the back and summoned his weapon. He launched solar discs directly into the tornado, and the midges finally began to die. And the woman suddenly looked out of the car window and saw the guy. Their cars began to approach each other. The hero, in turn, diligently tried to kill the Zerg. In another car, they were discussing in full swing where such a master had come from who could disperse this storm. However, she did not want to calm down and continued to pursue the cars. And suddenly, a multitude of red splinters began to fly out from its middle. They were moving straight towards Han, but Yufan decided to protect him with his body, and a moment later he received multiple fatal wounds. His whole body was covered with splinters. The needles were poisonous, and if they were not removed, the man would die in a couple of seconds. However, only the hero thought so, because needles immediately began to crawl out of Yufan's body. They fell to the ground with a clang, and when he looked at the man's characteristics, he was stunned, because there was an SS rank feature there, immortality. The hero could not understand the difference between rapid regeneration and immortality, and the man wanted to talk about his ability. However, the black-haired man said that he didn't care and ended the dialogue. Meanwhile, Yue reported that they seemed to have arrived. Yufan pulled himself away from his thoughts and looked ahead. He saw that huge monsters appeared in front of them. The insects sat on the rubble of houses and shortened their mandibles. Their size greatly surprised the girl. However, Huang wanted to deal with them quickly. He waited until the insects approached the car, and then he immediately played an attacking song. The blue strings began to pierce everything they found, and a second later, all the monsters fell to the ground. The man couldn't believe his eyes. However, Bai Shuang was beginning to get used to it. In this way, they completed more and more tasks, and the leaderboard began to shift rapidly. The mercenaries who watched this were simply stunned. One of them looked thoughtfully at their team number, and then, out of anger, he threw his tablet on the floor because his assignments were being taken away and his points were being stolen. So he gathered all his allies to get ahead of Huang's team. And so, 10 minutes later, they were already driving through the wasteland. They were going to quickly complete the task with the magical snake, but suddenly one of their team asked to look to the side, and there was just this snake, but chopped into pieces. Unfortunately, they didn't manage to get there. The leader then ordered Zhao Ya, his ally, to find those bastards. The boy obeyed his order, but another boy tried to stop his leader, because Huang's team had already left the city. And this is indeed how it was. They were driving back happily, and someone noticed their pickup truck. The leader of that gang even bled from an excess of emotion. Meanwhile, something was happening at the Guardians' headquarters. The third eldest, Su Mingxuan, was surprised that the tasks in the dark blue city in Kanghai had become too difficult. His secretary said that a gang of hooligans was stealing assignments. The boss asked the guy to dig up a dossier on them. After some time, the files were found. The old man ordered the secretary to leave, and after examining both files, he saw that they were both classified. He simply couldn't believe it. But in the file with Khan, everything was even stranger. Han Zhan, the current leader, had no information at all. Suddenly the phone rang. Lin Jing called Mingxuan. The old man was momentarily speechless, because he was receiving a call from a very important person. The head of the second district ordered that the examination of Mingxuan's files be stopped. And after the call, he couldn't understand why the head of the second district was standing up for some schoolboy. Meanwhile, Zhan was fighting the Zerg with all his might. The chitinous snake rushed sharply towards the enemy. However, the hero's attacks began to tear him into small pieces. And a second later, it was all over. They have already completed the 18th task, and Bai Shuang was ordered to check the number of their points. Meanwhile, they had collected 1,800 points, but were still in last place. Yuvong simply couldn't believe it. The girl thought that this was all Zhao Hu's doing. The penultimate team had 2,300 points, but the odd thing was that more than half of the teams in the ranking had the same number of points. And apparently all the teams agreed to a draw with a certain score. This made the girl extremely angry. However, the guy believed in his own strength, and decided to return to the city. Later he arrived and informed the teacher that he had returned. He asked about their progress, but the guy couldn't say anything. But on the way they saved one crew, which the old man was already aware of. That girl had been tormenting Li Shutong for the past few days with the question of how to awaken. Moreover, the old man is familiar with her because the Shang family is his friends, and also one of the leaders in technology development. Only now did Khan realize how important a person he had saved. The old man said that her family wanted to arrange everything so that the girl would die. But by coincidence, they also saved the cargo that Li Shutong wanted to give to Han. The case contained breakthrough elixirs. They could enhance strength, speed, reaction, defense, and even innate talents. They accepted this gift with joy, and then they drank the contents of the flasks. Khan immediately moved to the second level of Spiritual Contract Master. Yue received the second level, as well as the power of the 4 elements. Khan, looking at the description of her abilities, noticed new blessings. Power circled around the hero, and new techniques and skills were revealed in his mind. After some time, they were released. The hero liked this elixir, because now he had more techniques for combat. Yue subconsciously felt that she had become stronger. The old man watched them with glassy eyes and said that their performance did not disappoint him. Suddenly, Han's phone vibrated, and when he answered the call, he heard Bai Shuang's voice asking him to check the task list. It was a level 3 threat mission that was worth 1,000 points. The mission was truly dangerous, so the girl doubted whether they should go there. However, Huang immediately grabbed Yue and ran to headquarters. After the young people left, another old man came to see Li Shutong. He reported that they had found Lingjin, but she did not want to return from Kanghai City. Meanwhile, Khan's team gathered on Xiaxia Street. Bai Shuang still had doubts, but the guy was going to go on this mission, and yet the girl wanted to stop her captain. Khan didn't argue, but simply asked if she knew what a red alert was. He said that if they don't stop the monsters, the city could be destroyed, and they should fight not for points, but for the salvation of humanity. Yu Fan thought it was a great toast. Bai Shuang was angry, but still decided to go. Meanwhile, a huge threat loomed over the city. The storm haze that surrounded the city was called the Wanderer's Gift. The black curtain could isolate everything, separating itself from the outside world. One of the teams was worried about their superiors sending them on missions outside, but their captain reassured them that the Wanderer was strong, and therefore more forces were needed to deal with him. Still, to begin with, they decided to send out a decoy, or rather, to look at those who went head-on against the Wanderer. Han sensed a dark Wanderer nearby, so he asked Yue to be careful. Bai Shuang, however, was preparing for battle with a serious face. But Yu Fan didn't care, because he was immortal, and so they went into the dark vale. The city inside was as if in a thick fog, and the hero walked according to his feelings, because he sensed monsters somewhere nearby. He ordered his allies to be careful, because he knew they were being watched. Yue also felt it, as if a pair of eyes were watching them. Meanwhile, they moved forward with their pack. Suddenly, the girl heard a rustling sound and immediately grabbed Khan's shoulder. She felt as if the life force was being sucked out of them. Bai Shuang explained that this is indeed the case, and, according to the data received, they have half an hour to find the core and destroy it. Otherwise, they will become food for the Wanderer. Suddenly, Bai Shuang noticed the core, and the man confirmed that this was it. The core looked like a huge eye with crimson veins. Huang thought it was too easy, since all that was left was to destroy the core. But suddenly the floor beneath his feet began to ripple, and his team suddenly began to sink into the asphalt as if into quicksand. They were stuck in it up to their waists. Yuvong rushed to save Bai Shuang, but the hero did not stand aside either. However, he didn't have time to do anything, because in an instant, a wall appeared in front of him. The hero realized that the core was capable of giving life to any object, and so Yue decided that they should destroy this living wall. And now it has already turned into a zither, and Khan's eyes lit up and he decided to pave the way by force. The fast solar discs rushed towards the wall. They created powerful explosions that left craters in the wall. The stones shook and cracked. However, after some time he immediately recovered. The main character realized that everything was not so simple, and suddenly numerous stone walls began to appear around him. The Wanderer tried to trap the guy, and somewhere up high, something unexpectedly flashed by. A certain monster flew out from an ambush to attack Zhang from behind. The boy somehow managed to react, and he managed to dodge, letting the monster pass him by. The insect flew into the wall as if into water, and after this, Khan tried to understand whether he had imagined it or not. But before he could explain the details to Yue, he decided he had to leave. After some time, another team stood in the same place. Their leader said they should be on guard. However, his assistant said that everything was fine, since they only had third-rank masters on their team. But suddenly something unexpected happened that made the team lose all their ardor. Numerous living walls burst out of the ground, and the room began to be covered in fog. The subordinate called out to his captain, who was standing and looking at the wall. He didn't answer, so the guy decided to go up to him and turn him around. But this was no longer quite his captain. The man's eyes widened and he pounced on his ally, and from his forehead protruded the body of an insect, which immediately jumped into the guy's eye. Yufang meanwhile escaped, taking Bai Shuang with him. The girl was worried about their lives, but the man was confident in his abilities. Bai Shuang said that she envied his powers, but he said that immortality was a kind of punishment. He changed the subject and said that they couldn't leave because the place was a dead end on all sides. Bai Shuang asked him to explain, but he said there was no way out. Then the girl decided to take matters into her own hands. She touched the wall with her palm and read the spell. The wall immediately began to crack, and later it completely shattered into pieces, leaving Yu Fan perplexed. In the haze, they noticed the silhouette of their captain. Bai Shuang immediately started calling him, and after asking him to be careful, Khan immediately noticed that stones were flying at him, which he deftly dodged, and he landed just as softly on a stone ledge. Finally, they were able to reunite, but while Bai Shuang was talking about how they got out, a stone hand formed behind them. The hero immediately hastened to inform them about this, and the couple only had time to turn around. However, the hand was immediately cut off by a golden sickle. This battle was extremely dangerous, and so Khan asked his allies to leave. After all, a huge stone golem had just appeared in front of them. The black-haired man, like a true intellectual, decided to use the power of the wind against the stone. A column of furious tornado swirled around him, and Yufeng and Bai Shuang jumped out of it, avoiding the blow. They couldn't fight Khan, because they were now being blown away by the shockwave. The hero decided that they needed to quickly finish off the Wanderer, since he was summoning monsters more and more often. The sphere was behind the golem, and if they get to her, they will destroy the Wanderer. The couple decided to take on the golem, but he didn't make them wait long and rushed into the attack. Yufan decided to go first. He used his gift, and golden veins began to shine on his body. And instead of attacking, he decided to put a shield in front of himself. But in this way, he was able to pin down the enemy, giving Khan the moment to destroy the sphere. The hero did not hesitate and ran towards the enemy. Summoning his new powers, he recited a mantra as bright lightning streamed around his body. The energy summoned by the strings of the zither pierced the golem's head. The lightning immediately spread throughout the entire room, and the energy only intensified, pinning the stone creature to the ground. Yufan was hit glancingly and flew to the side, and the second lightning struck straight into the core. It immediately began to develop small cracks, then it completely fell apart. The man was able to wake up in flight and land right on his feet. He already thought that they had won. But Han, with his last strength, said that Yufan should run away from here, and the boy's body immediately flew into the wall. A demon appeared before them and said in an inhuman voice that they had nowhere to run. Yufan recognized him as an adult wanderer. Behind him stood Bai Shuang, smiling and saying that this was her surprise for them. She kept it with her all the time. Khan asked why she was doing this, and she started crying hysterically and going crazy. An unhealthy glint flashed in her eye and she said that she wanted to kill them all. Yufan couldn't believe his eyes, but the hero had already guessed what was going on. He said that this was not the first time this had happened, and that a parasite had taken up residence in the girl's body. This is a 4th-rank insect species that has the brain erosion skill. They take over human brains, and also have the ability to reproduce and divide. There was a case in the city's history when a worm invaded the hero's brain. He left behind mountains of corpses, and it took a huge effort to stop him. This species should have died out 32 years ago. However, they had to fight against him. The problem was that the dark veil had swallowed up the young wanderer and had become even stronger. So Han asked Yufan to give him some time, and a second later his wounds began to heal. But Bai Shuang noticed this and ordered the new wanderer to attack. He immediately attacked with a beam of energy. However, Yufan was already running towards him with his protective dome raised. A huge amount of energy tried to crush the man's defenses. Meanwhile, the girl crept up to him and, using her power, tried to convince him that Yufan did not have an immortal body. However, it didn't work. Having hit the girl, an insect flew out of her. It immediately tried to penetrate the man's body, but he was able to grab it and pull it out of his hand, and then he crushed it. The adult wanderer found this interesting. He was also interested in how much longer Yufan could hold out. And then there was a loud bang from the impact. Yufan continued to hold back a sea of energy. His strength began to run out and he asked Khan how much longer he needed to hold out. The guy, instead of answering, sent Yue to deal with the worm. He decided to take on the wanderer, and the girl meanwhile took on human form. The hero didn't think that he would have to use all his strength. He immediately rested his foot on the asphalt, and then he made a sharp leap straight at the enemy. However, his blows missed the target. Golden rays pierced the walls and shattered the floor, and the wanderer decided to take his weapon right out of his mouth. Having spread his wings, he said that the guy had amazing strength. A second later, the room was illuminated by a red flash from the monster's strike. The hero was preparing to meet her. He had metal gloves on his hands, and with one of them he tried to split the light. The energy cracked and fell apart. The monster couldn't understand where Khan got this glove from. More than 10 years ago she killed one of the Zerg kings. However, Khan didn't care about this at all. He charged head-on and struck the Zerg straight in the gut. Meanwhile, the monster was still wondering why this particular guy got these gloves. Zerg wanted to hurt the previous owner of this weapon, but in the end, he hurt the monster. However, he also did not lag behind and mercilessly stabbed the man. And when their blows came together, the force of the shockwave carried them back. Khan tried to finish everything quickly, because soon his energy would run out. Now he felt what it was like to be between life and death. He immediately mastered the second phase of his combat technique, and a moment later he rushed into the attack. The world became a kaleidoscope as the guy rushed forward at incredible speed. Zerg didn't even have time to react, and because of this, he missed a blow that immediately made his body crack. Moreover, the explosive force of the attack simply tore his entire torso apart. And the guy said that the monster still lost this fight, but he wasn't going to give up so easily. Huang was very surprised by what he saw. He simply couldn't understand what was happening. After all, the monster had just come together before his eyes. Now he looked much more frightening. Moreover, Bai Shuang hid from them, and chains started flying around the room. They tried to restrain and tie up their opponents. Meanwhile, the Zerg lifted a huge block of stone into the air and said that no one would escape from him. The boulder rushed at such speed that it immediately burst into flames. Yufan tried to stop her with his bare hands. He did this at the cost of his life to save the leader. After all, his supply of short-term immortality had reached 0. The hero understood that the man would not last. But suddenly they heard someone behind them using the 8 quick fists technique. And that was the 6th phase, which immediately rushed towards the monster, ignoring obstacles. The Zerg crumbled under the fist like a fly, and the fist immediately evaporated into the haze. The youth didn't even have time to understand what was happening. Meanwhile, teacher Li Shutong came out of his chariot towards them. He arrived just in time. The Khan was extremely pleased with this turn of events, but his strength left him, and his friends managed to catch him so that he didn't fall. The old man suggested that they take him to a quiet place while he sorted things out. Yufan didn't understand what he meant by "I'll figure it out." And then an insect flew past them. Some time passed, and the action moved to the hospital. Khan woke up in his bed and immediately started yelling something about the teacher. Yue was glad that he woke up, but the guy couldn't understand where he was. The girl explained that his teacher began to kill the worms one by one, but they could not find the queen. The guy also asked about Yufan. Yue said he was in intensive care. The man's bones were shattered, and without his gift he would be dead. Suddenly a nurse ran up to them and asked if they were Yufan's colleagues. She said that he was missing, and they looked at her in shock. Khan couldn't tell if she was joking or not. Yue assumed that the man had gone to look for Bai Shuang. The girl was the key link in the parasitic worms. The hero's companion also added that they were deducted 100 points, and he asked to explain in more detail. This happened because their teacher completed the task, and the organization also took the Wanderer's corpse. Khan was curious what their teacher had to say about this. Li Shutong said that it was their business and the guards, but the hero realized that the old man was on their side. Now the guy decided to go and take back what was rightfully theirs. Meanwhile, in the main hall, teams of mercenaries stood and discussed the fact that Zhao had divided the materials between them. But their conversation was interrupted by Khan, who kicked down the door. Standing in the middle of the hall, he loudly called out to Zhao Hu. Someone wanted to make fun of him, but the guy stood his ground. However, the man began to threaten him. He rushed at Khan with a knife, but the hero playfully brushed him off, and then he threw it on the floor. He said that the man's smile looked extremely irritating. Meanwhile, the others filmed it so that Khan would receive punishment. The man decided to take revenge, but the guy caught him again, and he started banging on the floor again. But someone's voice ordered him to stop. Zhao Hu came in person. Khan came so that the man could apologize to him, but he wasn't going to follow the brat's lead. One of his henchmen has already uploaded the video to the relevant departments. Yue was worried that they might be punished, but Han reassured her that the teacher would not allow that to happen. The henchman received a response from the other side and informed Zhao that no one was planning to help them. And even the supervisory department got off with just the answer that they would like to have the guy. Suddenly Zhao turned off his earphone, and he angrily threw it on the floor. Zhao asked what Han wanted from him, and he said that his team had killed the Wanderer and wanted all the materials for themselves. Therefore, the man should open the treasure vault, and the hero will take everything he wants. Their squabble continued, and Zhao wondered how many items Han would take out if he was allowed into the vault. However, he agreed if the guy went there alone and kept his things in sight. That's what they agreed on. And then the black-haired man smiled slyly at him, and he put the ring on himself. Sometime later, Zhao opened the vault for the guy. He hoped that the guy wouldn't even know what to take. Besides, he won't be able to carry much in his hands. His henchman was relieved by this thought. Meanwhile, Khan walked around with a book of treasure appraisals. He was amazed at the abundance of what the mercenaries had obtained. There were many parts of monster carcasses hanging on the walls. There were also many plants growing here. Suddenly Khan noticed something surprising. It was the shell of a level 6 wall crab. The material was excellent, so the guy decided to take it for himself. However, like everything else, because his spatial ring allowed it, Zhao couldn't figure out what that guy was doing there for an hour. But he finally came out, and Yue ran up to him. She was curious how it all went, but the guy said he would tell her everything at home. After that, he went back. Zhao and his henchmen thought the boy hadn't taken anything. When he called the manager, he thought that the hero had taken only 5 items. He was about to come up with a plan to take revenge on the boy. But the manager said that the items were not 5, but 50% of the entire storage facility. Zhao couldn't believe his ears. His eyes filled with anger. He decided that the organization would not let Khan get away with it. Then his henchmen said that he reported everything to headquarters, and they replied that the guy was a good guy. Zhao thought he had misheard, but the action suddenly shifted to Khan, who was already at home. On his desk lay a ring given to him by his teacher. He told Yue everything and said that it would be a lesson for Zhao, and she just came out of the shower and asked if he wanted to sleep together today. She explained that the guy had recently been injured, and so she realized that she was afraid of losing him. So today she won't let him escape. Suddenly the door to their room opened. It was some little kid who was complaining about the noise. A heavy silence hung in the air. Yue didn't even know that anyone else lived here, and the little one was amused by the fact that they lived in her grandfather's house, but didn't know who she was. It dawned on Han that this was Li Shutong's granddaughter. The girl knew him, and he looked at her characteristics and realized that she was a spirit of rank E. But like Yue, she had the form of one of the 10 most ancient artifacts. Suddenly the hero realized the stupidity of the situation and became embarrassed by her clothes. But she wasn't embarrassed, because she felt comfortable in her pajamas, because clothes helped her create, since she writes amateur stories about different universes. Besides, she decided to ask if they wanted to continue what they had started, and if not, then she had one idea. She would like to take matters into her own hands. Yue was a little irritated that the girl had no sense of tact, but she said that she didn't need it, because she just wanted to sign a contract, and Yue was confused by her thoughts. Khan said that if the girl signed a contract with him, her talent would awaken. She immediately agreed and began to undress. He didn't understand why she was doing this, and she explained that it was necessary to conclude a contract. The guy denied it, but the girl said that in her stories, this required engaging in carnal pleasures. Yue and Han didn't know what to say. He sighed and said that in reality, everything was much simpler, and the golden chains immediately began to swirl around them. He invoked the ritual of contract formation, and the girl felt ecstasy. Her new form turned out to be an ancient divine weapon, the Shannon Cauldron. However, her ecstasy continued. The girl's talent extracted spiritual energy, which meant that the guy would be able to break through to new levels faster. Without even knowing the girl's name, Khan left her without her pajamas. He decided to test her new talent. Meanwhile, Yue decided to go to the bathroom. She was a little upset that the brat also had a divine-level spirit. A little later, Yue began to hear strange dialogues as Han inserted something into the girl. These conversations were extremely obscene, so Yue burst into the room, thinking that they were doing something indecent. However, Khan was merely throwing ingredients into the crucible. The girl again became embarrassed by her thoughts. Meanwhile, the boiler produced a merger. The essence immediately began to flow out of it. This essence was like that spiritual pill that increased energy. Suddenly, the crucible turned into a girl and she flew at Khan. A moment later, she fell awkwardly along with the guy. Something inside her continued to burn, and she asked the hero to quench this flame. But Han decided to avoid responsibility and asked Yue for help. Meanwhile, the teacher's granddaughter became quite heated. Yue also fell on him, and the brat really started to cross the line. Meanwhile, Khan had 2 women on him, which was not an easy burden. Complete chaos began to occur, and things were moving closer and closer to one scenario. Meanwhile, the city fell asleep. The next morning was very difficult for the guy. After a wild night, the energy of the 2 girls became noticeably clearer. But Khan decided not to stand on ceremony and go straight to business. He stood up and walked embarrassedly towards the exit. And later he explained that they needed to find the missing team member. That team member was Bai Shuang. The black-haired girl looked at the photo and realized that she had seen the girl in a nightclub. She visited them often. The Khan was glad that they had found the trail so quickly. He sprayed some liquid on everyone and then got ready to leave. He also explained that it was a spray with the scent of hawthorn, which attracts worms. A little later, they found themselves near the club. It was quite lively there now. Han approached the bar and asked if the man had seen a girl named Hu Yuan Wei, and he smiled creepily and asked again about the name. The guy confirmed that he was looking for her. The people behind him heard this name and were stunned. The bartender joyfully shouted that the hero had named this name, which meant that he would pay for everyone in the bar. People rejoiced and squealed. The man explained to the boy that yesterday a certain client paid a huge bill and said that the next person who asks that name will pay for everyone. Yue kept wondering who it could be, and the guy guessed that it was Yu Fan. The man took out a box and said that the client had asked him to give this to Khan. The hero immediately reached for the thing. It was a chest with unknown contents. When he opened it, he found a note. It described the long-ago events of how Zhao took over as commander, and how the parasitic worms reproduced once a month, and that killing their queen would kill all the parasites. Li Lingchen asked what kind of note it was. Han explained that this was a note from Yu Fan, and that there were now about 7 parasites since February. Now everything fell into place. The guy left the girls at the counter because he needed to go to the restroom. Having found the right door, he walked through it. he saw a man in a suit in front of him, and he deliberately ran close to it. Khan pretended to need to go to the toilet, and the man smelled a nauseating odor. These were heather flowers, which parasites hate so much. That's why the man immediately attacked the guy with his fists. However, he activated the ability, and the man immediately flew into the wall from a simple slap, and a parasite flew out of his head. The guy managed to catch him. The worm squealed pitifully from the hero's grip. However, Khan decided to end his torment by squeezing his palm. The hero's companions immediately ran into the men's restroom, and he explained that the parasite had infected one of the visitors. Yue began to think hard about who else might be under hypnosis. The hero decided to look for clues, but another man immediately jumped out at him. However, Khan playfully dodged the knife blow, and a moment later he kicked his opponent, and a parasite jumped out of it. Not allowing him to escape, the hero immediately destroyed him. Li Lingchen was surprised that he was not alone here. It finally dawned on Yue that both of them were Zhao Hu's henchmen. Khan understood this too. People from several structures walked under Zhao, so there were parasites in their bodies. And the hero now understood where Yufan was now. Meanwhile, the man was engaged in obscenities. The girl beneath him, in turn, was in ecstasy. But they were interrupted by the door suddenly opening and a silhouette in it. It was Yufan. He read out the list of charges, making it clear that he knew everything about Zhao. Yufan was furious that the man was still walking free. The city leader realized that it was brother Min who died because of Zhao, and Yufan confirmed his suspicions and decided to punish the bastard. However, the old man was in his own city, so he was not afraid of anything. On his orders, a crowd of mercenaries immediately attacked Yufan. Zhao pointed his finger at the guy, which meant a call to action. The guy assessed his strength and realized that it wouldn't be easy for him, but he became furious again, and he decided to fight to the very end. However, his commander was already here. With one hand, he scattered all the mercenaries. Zhao was surprised by his appearance. The guy hastened to explain to Yufan that if it weren't for them, he would have died. But he pretended not to understand what Khan was talking about. The hero tried to challenge Zhao to a duel, but his henchmen were not going to leave their commander. They decided that they wanted to die together, and Khan could arrange this for them. His body sped up and he unleashed a series of attacks, and after a couple of seconds he finally fell to the ground, and around him lay the bodies of people who had lost consciousness. Yufan was surprised at how quickly Han was growing. Zhao decided to run away, but Khan did not give him such an opportunity. He was going to finish off the man. A moment later, he immediately hit him in the chest with all his might, and Zhao felt the parasite escaping from him. The worm flew right out of his head. Khan realized that this was not a parasite queen, but still she had to be finished off. The parasite was killed, but people started yelling at Khan from behind. People were unhappy that the hero killed Zhao, but there was nowhere to run because he would have to talk to the city mayor. Half an hour earlier, the mayor's secretary came to him with a request to sign the document. He had a parasite sticking out of his forehead, but the guy only told her to bring the documents to him. The girl noticed this and said with fear that he had something in his head, but a deafening screech immediately rang out in the residence. Meanwhile, Khan had a bad feeling. He sent his friends to the teacher. He took Yue by the hand and ran off to deal with the emergency. The enslaved mayor, meanwhile, issued a decree that Han Zhan should be arrested for Zhao's murder. He didn't think the fish would be able to swallow the bait so quickly. Meanwhile, Khan was hurrying somewhere out of the building, and he thought that he should separate from Yue and the others so as not to drag them into this. Suddenly, he saw something in front of him. Above him was an old man levitating on a disc and saying that Khan should surrender. He ordered the guy to kneel down, and he, unable to resist, did so. Meanwhile, Li Shutong was sitting in a cozy gazebo. He was drinking tea and talking to someone. His interlocutor said that the old man should hurry, because his successor would soon be executed. Li Shutong squeezed the cup in anger. He considered this shadow his old friend, and therefore was angry at this attitude. However, he said that he was just a quantum double, just like Li Shutong, so fighting was pointless. The old man accepted his argument. The shadow began to dissolve and said that many more surprises awaited Li Shutong. Li Jing offered his help. However, the old man said that Han could be a trap for him, because if Li Shutong was taken under control, the world would end. So it was worth thinking about everything twice. Meanwhile, the hero was sitting in prison. The old man tortured him, trying to extract a confession, but he only said that he did not understand what crime he had committed. Then the old man continued to beat him. He said that no help would come to the boy, so he only had two options. Either he joins them, or he will be cut in two by the guillotine. Khan realized that this unknown organization was using parasites for its own purposes, and then he said that now he knew which option to choose. In response, he stated that he would choose the third option. This angered the old man. The Khan's execution was planned for the very next day. The mayor was informed that the boy was being prepared for execution, and the man asked if his henchmen had been caught. The guards said that they were hiding very well. Then the mayor ordered to go further and catch them. Meanwhile, he himself did not understand why Khan was so calm. The hero remembered that his teacher promised to protect him from everything. There were rumors among the people about why Khan betrayed the guard organization. The mayor decided to greet the townspeople, and people were surprised that he was actually here. The mayor gave a speech about how ruthless a criminal Khan was. The crowd supported him, and the mayor was glad that Hanjan would die today. Replacing his joyful grin with rage, he shouted and ordered the boy to be executed, and the guillotine was activated. But the guy on the chopping block still showed no signs of worry. Suddenly, someone pressed a button on the remote control, and the guillotine stopped just a few centimeters from the guy's neck. The executioner thought that the mechanism was broken, and the mayor was furious that someone interrupted the execution. A girl from the Shang family stepped forward and said that Han was her benefactor, and she did not agree with the punishment. The mayor started yelling something at her, but Khan's team quickly made itself known, saying they disagreed too. The shadow spoke to Li Shutong and said that Han was already under the guillotine and the old man had lost. However, he said that the game is not over yet. After all, it was too early to draw conclusions. Shadow said that they should see how it all ends. Meanwhile, the old man was told over the radio that they had not had time to find out where the shadow had run off to. And later Li Shutong asked for the clues that they managed to dig up. Old Man Shang said that they found information about the organization that is behind all this, and it is called Crash. Meanwhile, the people in the square were perplexed. The girl from Shang said that Kang Chuan deceived everyone, and Han is the protector of the people, and she immediately asked them to look at the screen. There was a video of Zhan talking about justice and protecting humanity, and how hard he fights monsters. The crowd changed its mind, thinking that Khan was a true patriot. But the old man who tortured the hero tried to shut them all up. Yue Wei was surprised by the strong pressure and asked who this master was. But the old man only said that the execution of Khan was a mission of destruction, and no one dared to interfere with it. So he immediately sent a fiery palm straight at the boy. However, a hole suddenly appeared in its center. There was an explosion and the hand was blown to pieces. The old man could not understand what had happened. But then he got hit by someone's energy. The fire was so hot that it simply burned the old man. And the crowd couldn't even figure out who could have done it. And only Yue Wei noticed the silhouette on the roof. It was Li Shutong. The mayor decided to intervene in the matter to finish off Khan. The hero thought that since his teacher had intervened, it was time for him to act too. A huge fist rushed towards him. However, the guy easily dodged this. The mayor was surprised by such incredible speed. He didn't have time to react to the fact that Khan was already next to him. A sharp blow landed on the man's head, and the mayor landed on the ground like a comet. The Khan went down to him and began to wait, and a huge parasite flew out of the mayor's head. However, she didn't have time to slip away. The guy immediately crushed the uterus. The crowd saw all this and began to buzz nervously, and the hero raised it above his head and declared that it was a parasite that was trying to turn people against him. People realized that they had been fooled. Li Shutong came down to Han. He asked if his student had ever been on the brink of life and death. And having received the answer, he said that Khan had done a good job. But it was a pity that the black-haired man was too cruel and left no traces of the Crushers. He immediately explained that it was a mystical organization that had infiltrated the guards. Khan was surprised that there was an entire organization hiding among them. Then Yufeng approached him and said that they had found Bai Shuang's body. The hero was a little upset by this information. The man explained that she was frozen along with the others, and that the funeral would be at sea, since 1,001 people died in this incident. Later, the coffins were set adrift, and among those who saw them off on their long journey, there was no one with a smile on their faces. Many people lost their loved ones, and Khan blamed himself for not protecting the girl. Meanwhile, veins began to rise on her corpse, and the facial features began to change. And a moment later, something completely disgusting came out of her mouth. After some time, October had already arrived. Khan's entire team had already reached level 3 after the parasite incident. Lingshan also managed to catch up with them. Yue Wei, on the other hand, gained much more musical ability. The girl from Shang also wanted Han to make a contract with her, but he refused. She then said that she hoped to someday acquire divine powers. Li Shutong asked Han about his plans, and he said that he wanted to continue to become stronger. So the old man decided that he would talk to Wei Qing and send the hero to the front lines. But the guy will go there alone, because the method of increasing the level of spirits is different from those used by the masters. Jan decided to rely on the teacher. Meanwhile, on the military front in Daxia, a real nightmare was unfolding. The tanks were firing at full speed, and the monsters emitted inhuman squeals due to their injuries. People also suffered losses. One of the fighters asked why he came back. An argument broke out between them because they had too many losses. The man could not flee the battlefield because he was on an elite mission. Suddenly a helicopter flew over their heads. He flew on, and his bottom opened up. Khan jumped out from there. He approached the man and said that he was a new soldier. And when asked about the contract spirit, the hero said that he was the only one here. This angered the man, because Khan was acting too confidently. But his comrade calmed him down, explaining to Xiao that this guy was apparently a young master from the city. But the captain looked at him, because he thought that Khan was just a brat. Suddenly, Xiao addressed his comrade as Old Man Shang and asked if he could allow their team to have such a noble young master. And he, playing along, said that they couldn't afford it. They laughed at their own skit. Then Xiao invited Han to come along with him to introduce him to the team members. He asked the guy about his level, and then said that he was 4th rank and the captain of their squad. Also on the team were Kai Shifeng and Shi Xiaoqian. The girl tried to put on her jacket and said that this mission had completely exhausted her, but her hand just didn't want to fit through. Then she called the newcomer to help her. He didn't deny it. And the fire in their camp burned peacefully. The girl looked at the guy appraisingly and thanked him. She asked Xiao why the newbie was without his spirit, and Khan introduced himself to them and said that he had brought them a gift. This was level 3 armor. They thanked him warmly. She said that he was an operator technician and did not need armor. Later, he said that he needed to go collect everything he needed for the mission, and then they would leave. Meanwhile, Khan asked his colleagues about the captain, and they said that he drove tanks and hated officials. But the girl immediately stopped short, thinking that she had offended the boy. However, their dialogue was interrupted, as Xiao ordered them to prepare for the mission. Their mission was to complete the extermination. The Izanami clan's snakes multiply rapidly, and the human army's mortality rate is 1 in 100, which is not enough to compensate for the snake clan's reinforcement rate. The first battle zone stood in a stupor for a long time, but Wei Qing changed their position. He almost stopped them single-handedly, but was attacked by 4 snake emperors. People discovered dozens of nests that now needed to be destroyed. Their time was running out, so they had to move on. And the flame in their camp continued to burn steadily. But now it's time to fight. Xiao's team moved forward, and Khan noticed that they were apparently in place. He also saw something transparent hanging from the trees. It stretched for kilometers ahead. Xiao explained with surprise that it was a snake molt that appeared after the Izanami clan reached the next level. The Khan realized that these cunning snakes had hidden their eggs inside their shed skin. And it was true. Xiao did some reconnaissance and realized that the skin extended 7 kilometers forward and that it contained billions of eggs, and some of them began to hatch. The team didn't understand what the sound was at first. However, immediately after this, the eggs began to break synchronously. The sound was so loud that people had to cover their ears. Even Xiao, sitting in the mecha suit, felt it. And suddenly he was carried off the cliff by some wave. He screamed because he was unable to do anything. And Khan hastened to catch him. Now they are separated. Xiao tried to reason with the guy, but it was all in vain. Khan grabbed the robot's hand, and then he pulled it towards himself with all his strength. He sent it back to the mountain right in mid-flight, and the throw turned out to be quite successful. So much so that Xiao was able to land on his feet. However, Khan found himself at the bottom of the cliff. The captain was still in shock that the young man had such strength. Xiao Kan said the boy probably fell to his death. She said it was his fault. But suddenly they noticed a hand that appeared on the edge of the cliff. Khan shouted loudly that he was not dead yet. They helped him get out and were very happy that he did not die. They were surprised and scared. The captain scolded him for his self-sacrifice, but Khan did not deny it. But only then did they realize that they were surrounded. The snakelets hatched and began to approach the people in a tight ring. There were so many of them that the ground could not be seen through them. Now they had to fight for their lives. Xiao Kan and Shifeng were extremely frightened by such a number of enemies. But the snakes didn't stand on ceremony and immediately jumped on the people. Meanwhile, the captain tried to find a moment for them to retreat. Shifen didn't believe in their strength and said that they would all die here. But Khan did not give in to panic. He raised his hand and activated the ring. A spherical dome appeared around them. The snakes stopped moving and froze. The captain was surprised by their behavior. Time passed, but the snakes still did not move. It was as if the little snakes were worshipping them. Han asked Xiao to burn all the snakes. He understood everything and tried not to miss the moment, quickly starting to fire at the enemies. The snakes writhed in the fire and died, and a fire almost started in the forest. Colleagues began asking what Khan had done, but he only said that he had used the equipment. Finally, Xiao finished off his opponents. Their bodies were still in agony, but they were harmless. The captain began to doubt that the guy was just an ordinary master of contract spirits, but his thoughts were interrupted by an alarm signal. Khan tried to understand what had happened. She explained that the mission was a failure, as less than 10 teams completed it. They were lucky to have Jean with them. She said that there are several main routes of the snake's path, and therefore they can continue their mission. The captain wanted to use Khan's abilities. However, he said that if they did not get out of here as quickly as possible, they would be killed. Since they had been noticed by the 5th level Izanami snake, they looked back at him mesmerized. However, Khan yelled at them because they should have run. They would hardly have been able to defeat such a colossus. However, Xiao decided to cover his squad. The giant snake just got its share of missiles. And Khan realized that his captain was rushing to the next world. After all, his robot was now already in the snake's mouth. With her huge fangs, she bit through the metal and the man flew out of the robot. His entire body was damaged by metal fragments, and the rest of the team already thought that he was dead, as did they themselves, because a snake was already rushing towards them. However, the dome protected them from the enemy's onslaught. The guy immediately realized what saved them. It was the level 6 armor that Khan gave them. The snake couldn't bite him with its fangs, so it decided to use poison, who calmly reached their carcasses, and their bodies simply began to evaporate under the influence of acid. Khan stood nearby and watched this with fear. Now the snake rushed at him too. The boy's instincts screamed, and he immediately began to fight. Dodging the blow, he flew into the air. A zither appeared in his hands and he used a spell, and a crushing stream of wind rushed towards the snake. In response to this, the snake released a fang from its forehead. He rushed straight at the man like a long sword, and it flew into pieces due to the strong wind, and the guy had to go down. Having dispelled the wind magic, he fell to the ground. It was clear that the 5th rank guardian was too strong for him, but the snake didn't even give him a chance to think about it, and suddenly a blue ray of light flew into her head. It was the sword that instantly killed the monster. The Khan was taken aback by such a surprise. A girl flew up to the sword, and then she stood on the monster's head. The Khan bowed to her and thanked her, thinking that this was his senior. Gongyan Jin just chuckled. She said that she was not a foreman, but from a city of utter evil known as the Land of Exile. Khan knew about this, and that there were a lot of criminals there. They are not accepted by any nation. They also indulge their own desires without the slightest respect for the opinions of others. Han also broke out in a cold sweat because the person in front of him was a level 8 SSS rank Valkyrie. Suddenly the girl jumped down towards him. She liked the song he played, and also that it made the girl stronger. That's why the Valkyrie decided to take the guy with her to support her in battle. But the guy wasn't going to give in to her so easily. The girl didn't like that an ordinary 3rd level master dared to refuse her. He couldn't escape from the mission, and she offered to take him away by force. In that case, he decided to end his life. She didn't think he was so determined, so she simply asked him what was stopping him from going with her. Khan thought that she liked him very much, and so the guy decided to force her to help him complete the mission. He said that he would go with her if she helped completely destroy the snakes on the battlefield. She agreed to this condition. Then the guy decided to give her the map of Izanami's nests. He explained the plan to her, and that there were 3 points where the cubs could be intercepted. The girl looked at him with a smug look, and then something suddenly started coming out of her back. It was some kind of huge and terrible demon, and the girl screamed, saying that the wounds were making themselves felt. The guy couldn't even figure out what was happening, but she only managed to tell him to run. Her body began to transform, and Khan felt a demonic aura coming from her. He then directed a healing beam at her, and her obsession began to pass. The demonic aura gradually began to fade away, and the girl couldn't understand what had just happened. The guy explained that purity powder has healing and suppressive effects. Then he asked about her wound. She said that she was wounded by a 9th level snake emperor, and now the wound sometimes makes her go berserk. The guy was surprised at how scary this snake was. Later he asked to examine the wound. She began to undress, but said that she would cut out his eyes when he finished. Nevertheless, Khan began his examination and said that the wound was not deep. The girl felt good from being touched. Now he has begun treatment. A green light flowed from his hand, and the girl began to feel pleased. But the wound could not heal completely. He said that purity powder would suppress the symptoms, but could not completely dispel them. However, he could try to create the needed thing by creating a new drug. And the girl was surprised that he had 2 contracts with perfumes. Energy immediately burst out of the cauldron. He decided to use it to heal the wound, and the girl felt more and more pleased. Han said that her wound was already half healed, but Jin asked him to do it again. He also explained that he had used the energy of nearby defeated creatures, and therefore needed more corpses to reactivate the skill. And she said that his task was precisely to destroy the snakes, so they were on the same path. Meanwhile, drones were flying over the forest. They explored the area, providing information about where the clutches were located. At headquarters, discussions were in full swing regarding future tactics. But the head of the second district said that the snake race was well prepared, and they were forcing them to send strong fighters to the front lines. So they needed to contact Combat Zone 8 and tell them not to act. Meanwhile, the Khan arrived at the scene, and the Valkyrie began to fight. However, the guy wanted to go first. He was confident in his abilities. And a moment later, an explosion was heard on the ground. He cut up animals with his bare hands, and with each blow there was one less snake. The headquarters suddenly saw him from a drone. They didn't understand what he was doing there. However, the guy seemed to be able to deal with his opponents. He wanted to practice his technique, but there were too many enemies. But he was distracted from his thoughts by the huge snakes that were already standing behind him. They caught him by surprise, so the Valkyrie decided to join the fight. She thrust her sword near Khan, and after that, blue energy began to flow in the air. The girl was ready to cut and kill enemies, and with just one blow she knocked down the nearest snakes. Khan thanked her, but said that he could still fight. She liked how fearless the hero was. During the battle, the guy was able to open the third lock out of 8 possible in his technique. Next, he decided to try out a new power. She flashed past the enemies like a swift beam. Jin was increasingly surprised by the boy's strength, and in her mind a passion appeared that she could not suppress. The headquarters looked at the screens in bewilderment, and tried to understand who this girl was. The head of the second district said that she was a rank 8 contracted spirit, a female demon who was defeated by Wei Jing a month ago. Meanwhile, the mountains began to drown in the blood of snakes. There were many dead carcasses on the battlefield, and now the guy will be able to restore the girl's wound. The cauldron immediately began to absorb the energy of the fallen creatures. He asked the girl to prepare for treatment, and she took on a serious expression. Khan came up behind her and saw the source of the illness. Then the restoration began. Jin was overcome with incredible ecstasy. There was a black thorn in her wound, and the guy was wondering whether he should pull it out. She said that it was worth taking it out. And the energy of the black thorn began to flow into the cauldron, which made the girl feel incredible ecstasy again.